Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. I used to call our city a hummingbird. Always darting, always bright, living on sugar and speed. Work, errands, dinner with friends, more work. My calendar glowed like a warning beacon. Yet I loved the rhythm because it kept hard questions quiet. Was I happy? Was she? You can outrun silence for years if traffic is thick enough. That week, my boss sent me to a 2-day conference in Lahore. PowerPoints, lukewarm tea, a hotel view of cranes and neon. I packed a small case, kissed my wife on the forehead, and told her I'd be back Friday. She smiled without reaching my eyes. It was a tiny misalignment, like a picture frame just crooked enough to bother you when you're alone. I shrugged it off. People have off days. Couples do too. On the train out, my phone buzzed with a message from the contractor renovating our pantry. He'd found a pipe that would flood the place if it wasn't fixed immediately. He needed me to sign, pay, and pick a design choice for the shelving that I had insisted on. If we waited, everything stalled. My wife hated delays. I hated pointless damage. The conference agenda was already thinning. Nothing on day one required me. I answered the contractor, moved some money, and told my boss I'd handle my talk by video the next afternoon. Then I turned around. I didn't tell my wife I was coming back. Not out of suspicion, not at first. I just wanted to dodge a debate about "you said you'd be gone," or "I planned something with my sister," or any of those domestic ripples that appear when plans change midstream. It felt simple to surprise her and brag about saving the shelves. On the taxi ride home, sunlight flashed through jacaranda branches, scattering purple confetti across the windshield. I felt cheerful, oddly young, like I'd stolen a good hour from a busy week. Our building lobby smelled of lemons and old novels. I carried the small case on one finger and the contractor's paperwork under my arm. When I reached the door, I noticed it wasn't locked. That was normal in daylight. Inside, the air conditioner hummed. A glass sat on the counter, lipstick like a crescent moon on the rim. Another glass nearby, plain. The house felt full and empty at once, the way a theater could during a long pause. I heard laughter down the hall. Not loud, not careless. The kind of laughter that tries to swallow itself, forgetting a house keeps its own memory in vents and corners. I knew that sound. It had been mine once in the early days. My name rose in my throat and wouldn't leave. I stood still, felt my heartbeat walk ahead of me, and realized the world had tilted to a strange angle. There's a moment right before a storm breaks, when everything brightens. The sky lifts. The birds stop speaking. The leaves turn their pale undersides as if asking for mercy. That moment arrived in our hallway. I could have cleared my throat, slammed a door, made a movie of it. I did none of those things. I set my suitcase gently by the console, left the paperwork there, and walked through my own home like a guest who respects quiet hours. At the bedroom doorway, I looked. I didn't need to push further. I saw what I needed to see to understand too much. Her hair, his watch on the nightstand, the way 2 cups had been moved closer together. The details were ordinary, and for that reason, devastating. I withdrew without a sound. Something in me folded, carefully, like paper into a small ship. Somewhere beneath the shock, a colder part of me took notes. I went to the kitchen. The fridge hummed like an animal hoping not to be noticed. I drank water that tasted like we'd filtered every conversation we hadn't had. There was an exhaustion that felt bone deep, older than either of us. I had no taste for scenes, no appetite for shouting that would leave both of us raw and unchanged. I wanted clarity more than victory. Clarity can be so quiet. The couch beckoned, orange and soft, the one we chose together because it made us think of sunsets. I lay down, with a thin throw over my chest, and stared at the ceiling fan blades, slicing the air into neat quarters. I wasn't planning anything yet. I was not hero or judge, not even a husband at that moment. I was a person learning a new language in the space of a breath. You'd think sleep would avoid a room like that, but I drifted, in and out, shallow dreams where familiarity had lost its labels. When I woke again, the apartment had gone deeper into evening. The hallway lights glowed on their timers. The laughter had turned to that heavy post-everything silence. I checked the time. I thought about the pantry, the pipe, the shelf design. I pulled out my laptop and began to work. Numbers are comfort, procedures are rafts. I reviewed our accounts with a steady, mechanical patience I didn't know I owned. I listed joint assets, personal savings, the mortgage, the insurance policies we joked about at brunch. I emailed my lawyer, an old friend who had guided my cousin through a gentle, civilized separation years earlier. The subject line was tidy. Need to discuss dissolution. The body of the email was quicker. Call me in the morning. Urgent. I attached nothing. I said nothing unkind. I do not trust words spoken in a rush. They are arrows that hit the wrong targets. Then I opened a new document and wrote. Not a letter. A ledger of days. When she grew distant, when I grew tired, when we stood in the kitchen with a problem like a guest who wouldn't take the hint to leave. I wrote about the trip, the lobby, the glasses, the hallway, the decision not to turn the doorknob. I wrote so that later, when memory tried to embroider, I could look back and see the plain fabric. From the bedroom came sleep sounds, untroubled. I felt an ache, not of loss exactly, but of time misused. We had been good once, before our calendars began pinching us into strangers who occasionally shared dessert. I remembered our first apartment with the crooked blinds, the tiny balcony where we grew mint and failed at tomatoes. How easy it had been to forgive then. How impossible it felt now, here, with evidence like a passport stamped in red ink. I thought about confrontation and set it aside. I thought about leaving a note and decided on something more formal. Love, once broken this way, becomes a glass mosaic. You can make something beautiful from it, but you cannot drink from it again. In that certainty, I found peace that felt alien and also welcome. The night thinned. Dawn crept over the window frame like pale paint. I made coffee out of habit. I could have left then, slipped away with suitcase and laptop, let silence do the speaking. Instead, I waited because truth deserves witnesses, even if they never admit what they saw. I wanted the morning light to do what I could not, show everything without outrage. At 7, my lawyer called. Her voice was calm, practical, compassionate in the way a doctor is when giving you a diagnosis you suspected. We spoke in short sentences. She told me which accounts to freeze, which ones to leave untouched for ethical reasons, how to gather documents without pettiness or drama. I followed directions like a man rebuilding a clock. Click here, sign there. Authorize this, revoke that. Not revenge. Just repositioning my life on a new axis. By 8, I had called the bank. The representative asked extra questions, as they must, and I answered with a steadiness that surprised me. It felt less like anger and more like hygiene. Clean surfaces, no more crumbs of doubt. I emailed our financial planner and copied my lawyer. I scheduled a courier to deliver a packet my lawyer drafted at astonishing speed. An initial filing along with disclosures that would require signatures. I printed one extra set and placed it carefully by the coffee mug my wife used every morning. The one with the tiny chip on the handle that made you grip it with the exact pressure to avoid a pinch. I packed clothing, not all of it, I am not a ghost, I left paintings we chose together and books with our margins touching like hands under a table. I took the shirts I actually wore, the photo of my parents from their 30th anniversary, and the leather journal my brother bought me the year I forgot my own birthday. I left the wedding album, not as a gesture but as an admission, that history belongs in its rightful home even when you do not. The apartment, for all its new strangeness, still knew me. It knew where my keys would land in the bowl, which floorboard wanted to complain, which cabinet door needed a lift before closing. I moved through those familiar habits with a gentleness that felt like a goodbye without speeches. On the couch, the blanket lay folded again. I smoothed it out and tucked a corner under the cushion, as if the room might be cold later. She came into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes, wearing the easy Saturday comfort she always wore. For half a second, her face brightened at the smell of coffee. Then she saw me. Her expression shifted through a calendar of emotions. Surprise, confusion, calculation. Something like fear, something like shame, and a stubborn lift of the chin that said, I can explain. I said nothing. The quiet was a lake between us, perfectly still but deeper than it looked. Her phone lit up on the counter with a message from a contact, named in a way that made my stomach pull. I stared at the steam rising from her mug, then at the printed papers beside it. She followed my gaze. The color in her face drained and then returned in a wave. She reached for the packet with a trembling politeness, the way you would reach for a hot dish to move it from the table. She read the first page, then the second. Her lips pressed into a line. "What is this?" she asked, though she had already read what it was. "I think you know," I said, voice steady. "Breakfast is there. Coffee is hot." I picked up my suitcase. I did not look down the hall. I did not look at the glasses on the counter or the watch on the nightstand. I looked at my wife and saw a stranger who looked a little like someone I used to know. She opened and closed her mouth, a fish-learning air. Words failed her, or maybe they spared us both. I left the apartment as the city began its daily song. Vendors, scooters, a distant siren, delivery trucks backing into yesterday's promises. The elevator dinged, and the doors closed on a reflection of me I barely recognized. Not broken, not triumphant. Just a man holding a new map he hadn't asked for. Outside, heat gathered along the pavement. I loaded my bag into the car and sat there for a long breath. My phone buzzed with a blocked number. I let it ring. The contractor texted that the pipe was fixed and the shelves would be sturdy. I replied with a thumbs up and realized how odd it was to feel grateful for something so ordinary. I drove to a small serviced apartment near the river, the kind you book for work trips or for transitions. The receptionist handed me a key card and a smile that didn't pry. Inside, the room smelled of detergent and beginning again. I placed my suitcase in the closet and lined up 2 shirts on hangers like sentries. The bed was crisp, impersonal, a kind of mercy. I brewed tea and stared out the window at the water moving with its own agenda. Everything had already changed, and yet the city continued, unconcerned. People hurried over bridges carrying pastries and laptops. A child pointed at a dog. A bus splashed through a puddle left by last night's brief rain. Life, busy and unpersuaded by our private upheavals. My phone vibrated again, my lawyer checking on me. She told me the papers had been filed and would be served formally by afternoon. She asked if I wanted to add a note. I said no. Some gestures speak more clearly without annotations. She reminded me to eat. I thanked her and promised I would. I thought of the chipped mug, the empty closets, the accounts now paused like a song waiting for a better verse. I thought of the couch where I had chosen silence over spectacle. I sat at the little table and began to write again, not the ledger this time, but the story I would need to tell a judge, friends, my own reflection on mornings when certainty feels like a visitor who might leave. I wrote the beginning because the middle was already in motion, and the ending, whatever it would be, deserved to be met with eyes open. I didn't know then that a courtroom would gasp, that an unassuming file would shake the room like sudden thunder. I only knew that I had chosen a path where dignity could keep pace with truth. I set down my pen, folded the pages, and watched the river carry sunlight like coins. Somewhere, in our apartment, the clock over the stove ticked the same as always. Somewhere she stared at documents that spelled out a future neither of us had imagined on the day we said yes. And somewhere inside the story that had been ours, a new chapter waited, quiet for the moment, full of echoes I had yet to hear. The second morning after I left, my lawyer called again. She sounded almost amused, the way professionals get when something rare crosses their desk. "She's contesting the filing," she said, "but not in the way you'd expect." Apparently, my wife hadn't just denied the allegations. She'd claimed the entire marriage had been emotionally fraudulent on my part, that I had staged the business trip, fabricated financial stress, and manipulated her into what she called a moment of weakness. She wanted the court to see me as a calculating husband engineering a trap. I listened without interrupting. There was no surprise left in me, only a quiet interest in how far she'd go to rewrite the story. The court date came faster than I expected. My lawyer warned me to stay calm, answer precisely, avoid emotion. "They'll try to provoke you," she said. "Don't hand them the drama they need." When I entered the courtroom, I saw her across the aisle. Perfect posture, the same lavender scarf she used to wear on spring mornings. Her best friend, the man from my bedroom, sat 2 rows behind her, eyes on the floor. The judge glanced over his glasses with the expression of a man who had heard too many unhappy stories dressed in expensive suits. Her attorney began the tale like a novelist. "My client was emotionally neglected," he said, "misled into thinking her husband cared more about spreadsheets than his own home." He painted me as distant, controlling, even cruel in subtle, invisible ways. He described the lonely night not as betrayal, but as a symptom of my coldness. I watched the narrative twist itself into something almost believable. Then my lawyer stood. She didn't raise her voice. "Your Honor," she said, "this is not a case about neglect. It is a case about deceit." She handed the clerk a flash drive and a thick folder. "The evidence we're submitting shows not only the infidelity, but also a pattern of financial misrepresentation." My wife turned toward her, startled. I didn't move. I had discovered those details only after leaving. The private credit card she had hidden under her maiden name, the quiet transfers to an account labeled consultancy, the luxury receipts written off as therapy retreats. My lawyer had found more, tracing emails and statements with surgical precision. The judge scrolled through the files on the monitor. His eyebrows rose once, then again. The silence was heavy enough to feel. My wife's attorney objected, claiming invasion of privacy. The judge shook his head. "The documents are legitimate and relevant. Continue." My lawyer did, methodically. The receipts, the joint funds funneled away. The travel records showing weekends that were supposedly with her mother. She didn't gloat. She simply laid out facts like stepping stones. I looked at my wife and saw the same expression she'd worn the morning I left, caught between disbelief and fury that reality refused to match her version. When it was her turn to speak, her voice trembled. "I made mistakes," she admitted, "but he abandoned me emotionally. He made me feel invisible." The judge's reply was quiet. "That may be true, but invisibility is not theft." The room fell still. Even her attorney hesitated before asking another question. When proceedings paused for recess, she turned toward me as if to speak. I stood, nodded politely, and walked past without a word. Outside the courtroom, reporters lingered. Divorce cases involving money always draw attention. But I slipped through the side exit. In the corridor's echo, my lawyer caught up. "You handled that perfectly," she said. "It's not over, but you've shifted the ground completely." That night, in the small apartment by the river, I finally let myself feel the exhaustion. The city lights trembled on the water like restless thoughts. I realized I wasn't mourning the marriage anymore. I was mourning the years I'd spent explaining myself to someone who'd already decided not to listen. Weeks later, the judgment came. The court granted me the divorce, denied her alimony, and ordered repayment for misused funds. But what stayed with me wasn't the verdict. It was the moment the judge looked at me and said, "You showed restraint where many would seek spectacle. That will matter more than money." Afterward, I walked out into sunlight that felt new. Not triumphant, just honest. My lawyer joked about a celebratory lunch. I promised her one. The papers were final. The chapter closed. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's a quiet man leaving a courtroom, finally free of explanations, stepping into a world that, despite everything, still keeps moving forward. Months drifted by like slow-moving clouds, quiet, shapeless, but heavy with change. My new apartment had become more than a refuge. It was a mirror. Sparse furniture, neat lines, not a single item without purpose. It was astonishing how peaceful life could feel without constant negotiation, without tiptoeing around invisible eggshells of misunderstanding. I focused on rebuilding, not revenge, not pride, but stability. My mornings started with coffee by the window and ended with pages of my journal, notes about lessons learned rather than wounds reopened. People think healing is a sunrise. It isn't. It's a dim light that grows stubbornly brighter 1 hour at a time. Then one Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message was brief. "Please meet me. It's important." No name, but I knew. Against my better judgment, curiosity outweighed caution. I chose a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind where conversations are whispers and the coffee tastes like burnt nostalgia. She arrived 10 minutes late, wearing the same lavender scarf from court. It hung loosely, as though she no longer had the strength to perform composure. Her face looked thinner, older, stripped of the practiced confidence that once filled every room. She sat down without asking permission. "I didn't come to argue," she said. "I came to understand." I nodded, though part of me doubted either of us could. She spoke in careful fragments. About guilt, about realizing too late how trust doesn't die suddenly, but through small, quiet deaths. She said she'd lost the apartment, that friends had vanished when gossip grew teeth. "I thought he cared," she whispered, meaning the man she'd chosen over honesty. "Turns out he cared about my money more than me." I stayed silent. Pity is a dangerous emotion. It wears the mask of compassion while reaching for the past. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just needed to tell someone who once loved me that I'm sorry." The words didn't sting. They landed softly, like rain on stone already weathered smooth. I looked at her and saw not the villain of my story, but a person who had wandered too far into her own mistakes and couldn't find the way back. We were both guilty of something, me of silence, her of betrayal. But guilt shared doesn't build bridges. It only marks where they collapsed. "I hope you find peace," I said, and meant it. She nodded, eyes glistening. "You already have," she murmured, as if realizing that peace, once earned, cannot be borrowed. Then she left. No dramatic goodbye, no backward glance. The doorbell chimed behind her, and the cafe returned to its soft rhythm. That night, I walked along the river. The same one I'd stared at from my apartment window months ago, now calmer, reflecting the moon like a kept promise. I thought of how everything that once felt like an ending had quietly become a beginning. I joined a local volunteer group rebuilding community gardens on weekends. Hands in soil, sweat on my forehead, I found a strange joy in planting things that would outlive regret. One of the volunteers, a woman named Amina, had the kind of laughter that didn't demand attention. It simply filled the space where heaviness used to sit. We talked about books, films, how trust isn't built by grand gestures but by the consistency of small ones. There was no rush, no urgency to label what we were. Just two people learning to breathe without fear of betrayal. Sometimes she'd ask about my past. I'd tell her pieces, never the whole. She never pried, and that restraint was a kindness I didn't know I needed. Then one evening, while cleaning old files, I found the journal I'd written during those chaotic days. The final entry read, "Someday this will just be a story, not a scar." Reading it now, I smiled. It had come true. A few months later, I stood outside the same courthouse, not as a defendant, not as a husband, but as a witness in another case, there to testify for a friend. The building smelled the same, the marble just as cold. But I wasn't the same man walking through its doors. The past felt distant, almost merciful. After the hearing, I met Amina outside. She asked if being back there bothered me. I shook my head. "No," I said. "It reminds me that endings can teach better than beginnings." She smiled, looping her arm through mine. "Then let's make better ones." We walked away together, sunlight glinting off the river nearby. I didn't need revenge or validation anymore. Life had quietly balanced the scales in its own way, through truth, through time, through the freedom of not needing to prove I was right. And somewhere, maybe in another city, my ex-wife was learning her own lessons, perhaps planting her own kind of peace. The world kept moving, softly, endlessly, and I moved with it, no longer haunted by the past, but grateful that I had survived it.